Members, we now move to questions to the Executive Office. We start with listed questions. Questions 9 and 15 have been withdrawn. I call Robbie Butler.
Mr. Speaker.
Deputy First.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No such assessment has been undertaken, as it would not be possible to do so because we cannot know what would have been in a programme during the years in question. But we are, however, delighted to say that the consultation on the draft programme for government began on the 9th of September. The draft programme is supported by a wellbeing dashboard, which includes a range of indicators on the wider health and wellbeing of local people, our economy and our environment. The wellbeing dashboard will be published and regularly updated. This will be used to help us understand the impact that the programme is having.
Mr. Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer. If we are to continue to repeat the sins of the past, we'll never get any better. And it's, in my estimation, it's unarguable that the failure to have government here for 5 years out of 8 has in fact impacted on the fact that we didn't have a programme for government and people's lives. Can the Deputy First Minister give an undertaking to the House that a conversation may be had to learn from the mistakes of the past and we can move into a better dispensation for the people of Northern Ireland?
First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's imperative on all of us to work together to try to ensure that stability. At the heart of that must be addressing issues head on, but also to find a shared way through some of the challenges that we face. He is of course right, but I think it's also fair to say that in terms of the vision, the objectives and the policies outlined in the previous programme for government, those had not been fully completed at the end of that period of time in 2016. So there's no doubt that departments were able to continue much of that important work under the guise of that programme for government prioritisation previously set. But I do welcome the fact that we have the draft programme for government out to consultation. Ultimately, we can look back and learn, but what we must be about is looking forward, addressing those issues and trying to ensure that stable and prosperous future for all of us.
In the spirit of looking forward and delivering what's in this document, and hopefully it'll get a bit more specific, can you confirm now, Deputy First Minister, that you will be here for the remainder of this mandate, that you will not resign your office, and you will deliver what is in this programme for government and the final document that succeeds it?
I thank the member for his question. Perhaps some of those issues are outside of my control, and in addition, I do indeed hope that there are not matters that I would have to resign over, no matter what they are. But look, I've made very clear that I have a determination to try to create that stability. I think the people of Northern Ireland want that stability in order to drive forward the necessary changes that we need to see, particularly around the reform and the transformation of our public services. Our draft programme for government is called What Matters Most, and this is very much about the Northern Ireland Executive and this Assembly delivering for people on what matters most. And what matters is in relation to the health waiting lists, it's in relation to the transformation of those services to ensure they deliver effectively, and tackling the big issues around education and special educational needs, affordable childcare, growing our economy. That is what we're going to be focused on, about that delivery in the years to come.
Anne Forsyth.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank you, Deputy First Minister, for her answer. I want to take the opportunity to ask her about the wellbeing dashboard. I've had a look and it's good to see it online so people can have a view of what it is starting to look like, but I want to ask her, what is it going to look like and what sort of indicators will we expect to see there?
Minister.
I thank the member for her question. I think this is a very exciting development in relation to the wellbeing dashboard. There are 40 indicators on there. It's live at the moment, and I would encourage members to go on through the Executive Office website. Now, there may be some amendment made to what those indicators are, depending on the outcome of the programme for government consultation process. But those indicators very much are all about what the Leader of the Opposition referenced, which is monitoring progress against set baselines. And that will actually be done in live time as the various sources of that information are updated. So some of that will be done on a monthly basis depending on the reporting cycle, some will be beyond that, but that will be all transparent and open on the website as part of that wellbeing dashboard. So this is a really, as I said, exciting initiative, I think, in terms of monitoring that progress and hopefully the continual improvements against the targets that we will set.
Jerry Carroll. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The annual Racial Equality Indicators Report monitors the progress of the Racial Equality Strategy 2015-2025 on 4 key outcome areas relating to equality of service provision, increased participation, representation and belonging, celebration of cultural diversity and eliminating prejudice, racism and hate crime. The most recent report, released just there on the 19th of September, showed that compared with the 2014 baseline, levels of acceptance, for example, of Eastern European, Irish traveller and Muslims as residents, work colleagues or family members had all increased significantly by 2022. This is a key indicator of progress against the targets. While it remains a key priority to fully deliver the commitments in the current strategy, it is important that post-2025 there is a clear mechanism and overarching framework for achieving racial equality in our society. So as part of that, we will be examining how best to use ethnic equality monitoring and other measurements to assess the effectiveness of actions taken and to inform the new approach.
Mr. Carroll.
Thank you. Minister, you have repeatedly used the phrase legitimate concerns when talking about migration. Minister, there's nothing legitimate to be concerned about. When talking about migration, there's misinformation which definitely needs challenged and refuted. Will you commit to not publicly again using the phrase legitimate concerns when talking about migration? Because ministers need to be careful about language and not give a wink and a nod to people who may be engaged in or maybe are racist thugs.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. Let's be very clear. All racism, all hate, all public disorder or violence based on that is wrong. It's incredibly important to draw that very strong differentiation between that and concerns that are raised within communities. I have made clear that us as ministers, as representatives, as political representatives, we must be there to listen to people and to listen to genuinely held concerns that people have. And that includes access, for example, to affordable housing and access to public services. But I have said repeatedly, and I would suggest to the member that he goes away and takes a look again at what I said, which is that there may well be legitimate concerns and genuinely held concerns around access to affordable housing and public services. That is entirely different and no justification for any violence, racism, hate or disorder. I cannot be clearer on that.
Following on from that, I suppose, Deputy First Minister, just do you agree on the importance that there's a duty on all of us as political leaders to actively promote a zero-tolerance approach to racism and to build a future defined by inclusivity, tolerance and respect?
Minister.
I thank the member for her question. Look, absolutely, racism, sectarianism, hate, whatever that is based on, we've just released our framework and delivery plan on ending violence against women and girls. So that can be gender-based hate and violence as well. All of that is wrong, and we should stand strongly united as political leaders and political representatives against that.
Call Brian Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Deputy First Minister for answers so far. And I wish to ask Deputy First Minister, mindful of the date that it is today, how important is strong political leadership when responding to violence and racism, including anti-Semitism, on our streets?
Minister.
I thank the member for his question. And indeed, we've seen racism not just on our streets, albeit by a small minority, but across. We see it on social media, we've seen it played out. And indeed, also, as he has referenced, today is the anniversary of the horrific terrorist attacks on the 7th of October 2023 in Israel. And we must remember that as one of the darkest days. We stand today to remember the men, women and children who were brutally murdered 1 year ago, and to recognise the strength of those who have lost loved ones or had them taken from them. We should all be very concerned about the ongoing situation in the Middle East. We should all be calling for all hostages to be returned safely to their families and calm to be restored to Gaza, Lebanon and the wider region. Israel, of course, has a right to defend herself. I am deeply saddened by the anti-Semitism and the racism that has been demonstrated on social media and on the streets and another forum in relation to this issue. We should all stand united against all forms of racism and sectarianism, no matter where that is found.
Paula Bradshaw.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, Deputy First Minister, for your answer so far. You referenced ethnic equality monitoring, and obviously we haven't got that embedded on a statutory footing yet. And with the delay in the revised race relations order, are you minded to bring it forward through the office as a standalone piece of legislation? Thank you.
Minister.
I thank the member for her question. So this is something that goes just beyond that statutory requirement. There are a number of things that we can do, and indeed the unit within the Executive Office are working with agencies, with the civil service and public sector and wider in terms of monitoring that type of data and to collect that. It is of course important that we understand the issues and the challenges in order to take appropriate action where it is needed most. Part of that will also be around that monitoring that could be based on a statutory footing. We are actively considering that at the moment, and I know that the committee has been informed as to some of those ongoing discussions as well, but we are aiming to bring forward those suggestions and recommendations very shortly.
Hunter.
Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer so far. Just a little bit on that then, Deputy First Minister, do you believe that Northern Ireland should have a standalone hate crime bill, and if so, will you ask that the Justice Minister bring this forward?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. The member will be aware that this issue is under active consideration. It is an issue that fundamentally falls primarily with the Justice Minister, but it is a cross-cutting matter, so it's a matter that would need to come to the Executive and would also need to seek the agreement of this House. There have been concerns that have been raised in terms of the balance in all of this, particularly around the protection, absolutely core protection of the basic human right and civil liberties in relation to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. But both the member and I and many others across this House have been subject ourselves to a significant amount of hate in terms of social media, for example. So there are problems to be addressed, but I think we do need to be very careful around the way forward to have the right balance between tackling the scourge of hate, both online and in the world around us, with those basic human and civil liberties.
Jonathan Buckley.
Question number 3.
Minister.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the Junior Minister to answer this question.
Junior Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We recognise the important role high streets play in our society in more ways than one. They drive the economy and also create shared spaces where society thrives. We know the nature of our high streets and the way that people shop is changing, and we need new solutions to these issues. The report presented us by the High Street Task Force represents a genuine collaboration across many sectors, including central and local government, academia and the third sector, as well as businesses. This collaborative approach must continue over the coming years to deliver high streets, village, town centres and city centres that are fit for the 21st century. And we would like to thank the members of the High Street Task Force for their work. The report makes 14 recommendations, and we will shortly write to our executive colleagues to ask them to take forward the appropriate recommendations.
Mr. Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Junior Minister for her answer. Just in the past 24 hours, the Yellow Door Deli in my own constituency closed its doors to the Portadown High Street, citing spiralling costs. This is not an issue in isolation. It's happening in towns and villages right across Northern Ireland. So with that in mind, can the Junior Minister outline who is coordinating the cross-departmental approach that needs to be taken in order to deliver upon the High Street Task Force street report?
Junior Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for that important supplementary question. And our high streets are vitally important to communities throughout Northern Ireland. Of course, we must recognise those changes, as I've mentioned, in consumer shopping in recent times, and it's very sad to hear, and we all have examples of businesses which close and are not able to continue on, and that is very difficult to watch and to witness. And we understand that the difficulties there are around the cost of living, cost of goods. The High Street Task Force has highlighted a number of important actions that can help to revitalise our local communities, and it now will be up to the relevant ministers to take forward the recommendations most relevant to their departments, and in doing so they will wish to work with local councils and also play an important role in driving people back through various initiatives and animations.
Philip Wigan.
For her response, and a note in it, she said that there were 14 recommendations that were going to be sent to ministers. Can I ask if ministers support all of the recommendations in the High Street Task Force report?
Minister.
Thank you. So, sorry, just get my place here. So, in terms, yes, we agree with the principles of the recommendations. The high streets must be supported, and more detailed consideration of how the task force recommends we do that and any impacts since the report was published, such as the cost of living crisis, the budgetary position, and developments in place-based working, are all factors which colleagues across executive do need to consider. So colleagues across DFE, DFC, DFI and DOF may have particular thoughts on how to take forward the recommendations which sit within their policy control.
Stuart Dixon.
All of us suffer in our constituencies with challenges that high streets have, none less in East Antrim, in town centres like Carrickfergus and Larne. So, Minister, what are the learning points that have been held by the Executive Office about the publication of this particular report, and how will it be delivered? Minister.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think I have a relevant answer to that. If I could, I'll come back to you in writing on that particular point.
Patsy Malone.
Question number 4.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, the issue was discussed at our meeting with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster on the 2nd of October. We remain committed to ensuring that the needs of victims and survivors continue to be met, and we are delighted to have agreed the new Victims and Survivors Strategy, which has also been endorsed by the Executive. A key part of the strategy is to provide support for victims and survivors and their families as they try to move forward from the experience of the past. The draft strategy recognises the importance of truth and justice and the need to work towards greater societal recognition of the hurt, loss and trauma of our past. We will continue to provide support for victims and survivors through the Advocacy Support Network, which is delivered by community organisations funded by BSS, the Victim Support Service, and is part of the forthcoming Peace Plus programme.
Mr Malone.
I thank the Minister for her answer. Can the Minister, or I should say the Deputy First Minister, given that the ICRIR has only agreed to investigate 8 out of 85 potential cases, can the Deputy First Minister detail what steps she will take or her department will take to ensure that every victim of the Troubles has an equal opportunity for justice?
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his important question. I think it is appropriate to recognise the deep hurt that continues to be felt by very many families, and that is compounded by the fact that so many of hundreds of those victims and survivors have not yet had justice or truth. I mentioned that we had raised this issue to the Secretary of State. Of course, there are different views upon this important issue, but one of the issues that I raised directly was that sense that there is a hierarchy of victims or a two-tier approach. All parties around this chamber opposed the legacy legislation, and through that the establishment of the ICRIR as it is known. However, I think it is incumbent on those who have faith in the ICRIR to explain to families why that process is sufficient for some but not for all. And if a different process is required for some, then what is the inadequacies that is trying to resolve in the ICRIR process? I have to say I do have confidence in Sir Declan Morgan. I think he is a very honourable man who will do his best in terms of the ICRIR. There are issues about the Article 2 compliance, as highlighted by the recent court judgment, but these issues will have to be addressed, because at the heart of this is a responsibility on all of us to support all families to get the best possible opportunity for truth and justice, and all families deserve that same opportunity.
Ms. Huron.
And I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answers thus far. Deputy First Minister, in 2012, the former British Prime Minister David Cameron acknowledged shocking levels of collusion in the murder of Pat Finucane, and we know that this wasn't the only case in the north where collusion was at play. Is the Deputy First Minister confident that the public inquiry will now deliver the truth that the Finucane family so deserve and expose the practice of British state collusion?
Minister.
I thank the member for her question. Any so-called Article 2 compliant process should have the ability to get to truth and justice. I would, from a personal capacity, gently remind the member that there are people, not least those sitting in this room, that have truth that they could give to victims and survivors, and actually address the fact that they haven't had truth and justice. There are others that are associated with political parties and others who hold that important truth that they are withholding from families. So we should never forget that 90% of the murders that took place during the Troubles were by paramilitary organisations, and many thousands of those families have not received truth and justice. So I would appeal to everyone around this chamber that we should all be working together to ensure all families receive truth and justice.
Philip Brett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer and her ongoing efforts for the victims across Northern Ireland. Would the Deputy First Minister agree with me that all victims in Northern Ireland deserve truth and justice, and no more so than Gina Murray? Gina Murray, as the Deputy First Minister will know, campaigned tirelessly following the sectarian murder of her 13-year-old daughter by the Provisional IRA in the Shankill. She passed away this weekend not seeing truth or justice for her daughter. Would the Deputy First Minister agree with me that those who may hold information or continue to support those who carried out those acts finally honour her legacy and give truth and justice
Minister.
to those families?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his very appropriate question. As indicated, we should all take that time to pay tribute to the incredible work that so many families of those victims, all of the work that they did over the years to try to get truth and justice. And I pay tribute to Gina Murray, whose life undoubtedly was shaped so terribly by the tragic loss of her 13-year-old daughter, Leanne, in that sectarian Shankill bomb, something that could not be justified and should not be justified by anyone. But ultimately, this was somebody who gave and spent decades of her life campaigning for truth and justice for her daughter and for so many victims and survivors. So we pay tribute to her, and absolutely what we should do in memory of Gina is, as I've said, commit ourselves right across this House to campaigning for the best opportunity for truth and justice for all, and that all should have that same opportunity to get that truth and justice.
Claire Sugden.
At a recent committee of the Executive Office Committee, Sir Declan Morgan suggested that his commission is potentially taking forward investigations that are more independent than a public inquiry, given that the Secretary of State sets the terms of reference for the public inquiry and indeed can amend it if he feels in the public interest to do so. Does the Executive Office have an opinion on this?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for her question. There isn't a departmental position in relation to that, but as indicated, and I think sometimes we do bandy about terms like Article 2 compliant, and I know that that doesn't always translate to what it actually means on the ground, but it does mean a process that is sufficiently independent that it is deemed under our international commitments to have independently and fully have the powers to investigate these issues relating to the death of a person. So in that sense, that the key thing here is that the ICRIR must be Article 2 compliant in order to do that. But most of all, we've always said this, key to our approach has been that all families deserve that truth and justice. All families must remain with that opportunity to get that justice, and that's why we had opposed that blanket amnesty that was set out in the previous legislation, and we welcome that that has been changed.
Alicia McHugh.
Question 5.
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Infrastructure 2050 sets out the strategy for investment in infrastructure for the next 30 years to stabilise, deliver and transform. It aims to ensure that projects help create thriving communities and places, a clean, secure and sustainable environment and a competitive and connected economy. It also seeks to build resilience in public services. We are currently considering the final draft, after which we hope to be in a position to bring this strategy to the Executive.
Alicia McHugh.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer. Of government approach is required to achieve our objectives. Can the Minister outline how she will ensure that the ISNI is aligned to other key strategies?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. Look, it's absolutely essential. We have to learn the lessons from the previous investment strategy. It set out a clear prioritisation, it set out clear executive agreement, and yet some of those capital projects have not yet been completed. There are significant increased costs on some of those capital projects. I've said it before, I'll say it again, that when projects run over in terms of both time and cost, it means we can do less than what we want to do with the capital funds that are available. So it makes sense, of course, for these projects to be able to be driven forward in a way that best attempts that these are done in a timely way and on budget. That hasn't always happened in the past. We need to learn those lessons, and I welcome that there's a whole series of actions now taking place in terms of identifying the problems and ensuring that as we move forward with the new ISNI strategy, as is often referred to, that we're able to actually fulfil the ambition that it sets out.
Deborah Erskine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answers. The investment strategy is important to ensure that capital projects can drive investment to Northern Ireland. FDI in Northern Ireland has been a success story. What more can we do to work with the government to showcase Northern Ireland and maximise opportunity to attract more investment to Northern Ireland, and how can that be tied in to the investment strategy?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for her question. I think absolutely we have to work very closely with the relevant department in terms of business and trade across the UK. I welcome that there are two opportunities coming up this week. Firstly, in terms of the new Council for Nations and Regions, which will happen on Friday, which will be an opportunity to raise these issues, but also that the Investment Summit, which is happening on Sunday evening and into Monday in London, an opportunity for us, both the First Minister and myself, to engage at a high level with key businesses, seeking not just that investment, but to make clear the opportunities that there are for Northern Ireland. But throughout all of this and thus far, we have made it clear to the Prime Minister, to the Chancellor, to the Secretary of State, and we will continue to do so, that the UK strategy for economic growth and investment must include Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland must be fully integrated in terms of the pitch being made and the opportunities that can be secured in terms of ensuring that all parts of this United Kingdom can benefit from economic prosperity.
And thank you, Deputy First Minister. In the context of projects and previous investment strategies not being delivered, what lessons will the Department learn to ensure that all actions will be delivered on for the forthcoming one?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. There has been detailed work that has been taken forward, particularly under the Head of the Civil Service and through the Strategic Investment Board, SIB. SIB is tasked for bringing forward the new investment strategy, but they are undertaking a number of pieces of work to learn the lessons about what happened, but not just to identify the problems, but also to try to recommend where we can find solutions in process. We've always said that, look, this must be an executive that delivers. I want this to be an executive that is all about delivery. And part of that is getting the agreement in terms of prioritisation. A big part of that will be about securing the budget, the much needed budget. But an absolutely critical aspect of that, and very often where these projects fall down, is around the delivery and implementation and the rollout of that. We need to get that right, and that's everything right through from procurement and business cases, in terms of the contractual obligations and the rollout in terms of this on the ground. All of those pieces must work together if we are going to deliver on time and on budget, and that's what we very much want to do.
Can the Minister detail what specific targets will be included in the investment strategy to ensure regional balance is a key priority as stated in the draft programme for government?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for her question. And I hope that we have made it clear thus far that we want every part of Northern Ireland to benefit from economic prosperity. Our focus is on that economic growth. We recognise that economic growth is key in terms of ensuring thriving, happy communities, no matter where they are, right throughout this place. So therefore, of course, the investment strategy will be actively looking at opportunities to ensure that that investment is right across. And I'm sure that the member would welcome the recent announcement just last week around the A5. The point at the very very heart of that being that in order to get that prosperity, people need to be able to travel, to take up those opportunities, and they need to do so safely. Infrastructure is such a critical part of ensuring that prosperity, and we will make sure that no part of Northern Ireland, should that be the northwest, the southwest, Causeway Coast and Glens, right through to the Mournes and Newry and Armagh. I have probably forgotten somewhere in that, by the way, so if I have, I apologise. But we want to ensure that all parts of Northern Ireland prosper.
Timothy Gaston. Minister.
We have been clear that we must build on the common ground that we all share to realise the potential of the site for the benefit of all, and we are committed to working with the Development Corporation to achieve that. The future use of the listed and retained buildings is part of that wider discussion that undoubtedly will take place, but we recognise that there's a lot of history with the site, and that will require us to move with consensus and with sensitivity. Unlocking the potential of the site must be done in a way which is entirely sensitive to the needs of victims and to the history and heritage of this place. And I can assure the member that engagement with those affected will be an essential part of any process if it gets to that stage in terms of developing proposals.
We must move to topical questions, and I call Matthew O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, you've just mentioned sensitivity in relation to victims. Earlier on, you acknowledged the deep hurt felt by paramilitary victims. You also said that 90% of murders and the Troubles were committed by paramilitaries. How then do you think victims of loyalist paramilitaries feel when 30 years after the loyalist ceasefire, ministers are meeting representatives of those paramilitaries to discuss policy?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. Look, let's be very clear. Paramilitarism is wrong. It always was. There was always an alternative. But our peace process has always been built on engagement, and across many aspects of government, agencies, including the PSNI, engage with those within the community. We must always reach out and continue to engage with those who wish to progress. The continued transition of those once involved with organisations now on ceasefire has to be core to our processes and moving communities on. But I can assure the member that all engagement must take place firmly within the context of our public and firm view against all terrorism or paramilitary activity.
Hopefully that the Deputy First Minister will not be seeking the input of loyalist paramilitary gangs when it comes to other policy areas. But can I ask specifically, the programme for government says that paramilitary harm continues to affect too many adults and young people. It also says that paramilitary gangs continue to exert coercive control in certain communities here, including in East Belfast, where East Belfast GAA is unable to safely practice because there continue to be vexatious threats to their grounds. What message does it send when ministers in the executive continue to have meetings, and I repeat it, with representatives of those organisations?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. Again, can I be very, very clear in relation to this? Threats are wrong. Any violence and disorder on the basis of that is wrong. People should be allowed to go about their business, should that be in terms of work, education, sport, and I think the Education Minister has made that clear. But I would refer the member to the previous question and to look back over the course of the last 25 years, where at the heart of our process is around engaging with those organisations, I may highlight at this stage, that are ceasefire organisations. Now, where there is criminality, where there is continued paramilitarism or terrorist activity, then we again have been very, very clear. The PSNI must do everything that they can to have that criminal justice response to such activities, because there is no role for those in the Northern Ireland of today. There never was in the past, there certainly isn't in the future, and we must all work together to stamp out the scourge of paramilitarism.
Alan Chambers.
Minister, public confidence in this place has been somewhat eroded by the events over recent years. Could the Deputy First Minister give her assessment of the impact on this already damaged public confidence after the events that have occurred over recent days?
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. It is absolutely important that we show that leadership, and that leadership must be based on those principles of integrity, of honesty and of openness. And indeed, I would encourage all those to act in that manner.
Mr. Chambers.
Thank you for that. Certainly the last thing anyone in this chamber wants to see is another collapse of these institutions. Would the Deputy First Minister join with me and my party ensuring our commitment that all members should put the importance of devolution and good governance ahead of personal or party interests?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I thank the member for his supplementary question. Look, absolutely, we all have a duty here to do what we can to create that stability, and at the heart of that, as I've indicated, must be that open and honest and credible approach. Anything that discredits or damages that must be avoided at all costs, and indeed all actions possible must be taken to address that.
Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The DFM will have noted the case of the former Sinn Féin press officer Michael McGonigal, who recently admitted child sex offences. The Executive Office has responsibility for a number of important areas of work involving victims, historical abuse and safeguarding. How can the victims of abuse be confident that ministers in the Executive Office act at all times in the interests of openness and transparency, and most importantly, in the interests of victims?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his important question. Look, ultimately, these are serious questions for Sinn Féin to answer. It's very clear that there are a number of questions to be answered. I can only speak in this respect in my personal capacity, but I would encourage them to do so in a very open and transparent way. He's absolutely right. In the Executive Office, we had a role in overseeing the independent inquiry on historical institutional abuse. We are overseeing the work in relation to mother and baby homes and important investigatory research projects in relation to clerical abuse. And indeed, representatives from the main political parties here made the apology to the victims and survivors of such abuse for those failings and for those faults. Those failings and wrongs were all to do with the safeguarding of children. And that is what our primary focus must be. Lessons must be learnt from that, and those lessons from the findings are around openness, about candour, about honesty, about not moving the problem on to someone else. It is about taking responsibility. Those are all core. A huge part of that work, the reason for it, is to learn those lessons. There are serious questions at the current situation. It has to be answered. And as leaders, we have to be honest and we have to be credible. And I think very many people out there will feel that it simply has not been credible thus far, and therefore I urge the people involved to be open and honest and credible on this matter.
Mr. Barton.
I want to thank the DFM for her answer. In light of what she has said, would she therefore agree with me that the First Minister should now answer all questions put to her with complete transparency regarding how she acted individually and her party in all aspects of this case?
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for a supplementary question. And again, I can only answer for myself, but I absolutely agree. People deserve that credibility. There's been a huge amount of trauma out there in relation to safeguarding of children issues over recent years, over recent decades. We all have that duty as leaders in Northern Ireland to make clear that we're being fully transparent and open. And I think the course of the last week or so has been something that has damaged that credibility, and we need now to move to that. And I also would want to put on record that I distance myself from any comments in relation to trying to put the blame of this onto other organisations, particularly the charity involved in this, British Heart Foundation. I know the charity, they do a huge amount of good work. This is an issue where responsibility must be taken, and I hope that there will be very clear openness and honesty about this issue.
Sean McElwain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Deputy First Minister how aware her office is of the challenges faced by the agri-food sector in accessing workers, in particular mushroom growers and the fishing industry, and the impact that this would have on the Northern Ireland economy?
Minister.
Thank you. I thank the member for her important question. I've listened to both representations from herself and from the MPs and MLAs on this issue, but also from the agri-foods and farming sector and the hospitality sector. These jobs are absolutely essential. Northern Ireland farming supplies, it's a net contributor and a supplier across the UK, supplying 10 million people, well above our population. It's really important, it's really valuable, but they can only do that if they can get access to the right workers. This is an issue that we've raised continuously to the UK government, that in terms of an approach, it was never about closed borders entirely. It is about a sensible approach to migration and immigration and addressing those issues in relation to the needs of sectors as well. So we will continue to raise these issues because we know how important they are in terms of the continued supply of those goods.
Ms McElveen.
And I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer. Would the Deputy First Minister commit to leading a cross-departmental delegation to include the Agriculture and Economy Ministers to meet the Home Office to try to resolve the issues in respect of visas for workers needed in this sector?
Minister.
Thank you. Look, absolutely, and I really commend the member for all of the work that she is doing to highlight the concerns in this industry. We know that it is a serious concern, and I know that because the member herself has had that conversation with me. So absolutely, I think that the Minister for Agriculture should be a part of this and should be helping in terms of leading that team and being part of that team to speak to the Home Office about this important issue. And certainly I am happy to engage with the member afterwards to see if we can encourage the Agriculture Minister to do so.
Mr McHugh.
Concordia. Minister, do you agree that the city growth deal signed recently for Derry City and Staban Council area will be key to helping address regional imbalance, in particular in relation to the North West?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question. Look, absolutely, at the very heart of the city and growth deals is that sense of using whatever levers and investment possible to encourage that economic growth, the levelling up agenda as it was known. And that's very much what we want to achieve across Northern Ireland. We believe that a better, brighter future for Northern Ireland lies with that economic prosperity, but that economic growth must benefit all parts. That is why we are deeply, deeply disappointed to see that the Causeway Coast and Glens and the mid-south west city and growth deals have been paused and are not progressing. When you look at the statistics for some of those areas, there is significant need, and that need for that intervention of those additional funds coming in to invest for that economic growth. So we will be continuing to raise this directly. I have no doubt that the First Minister will agree with me that we should be raising this issue directly with the Prime Minister on Friday at the Council for the new Council for Nations and Regions as well. So look, we will continue to raise this at the highest possible level. We want all areas to benefit, and these city and growth deals are essential to that.
Mr McHugh.
Minister, do you agree that ongoing investment into areas such as the North West, and particularly into my own area, West Tyrone, that in turn will lead to a vibrant economy within that area and a thriving economy that we can look forward to in the future?
Minister.
Look, absolutely, and I think we've got fantastic businesses right throughout Northern Ireland. There are areas of Northern Ireland where there's a real particular focus on particular industries, should that be the advanced manufacturing, for example, in Mid-Ulster, right throughout the various specialisms that we have in different places. That is a model that I think we can build on, working with Invest NI, working across the various departments as well, to take a look to say, look, where there are job opportunities, where there is that opportunity for investment, how can we ensure that that is spread in such a way to bring that economic benefit to all parts? The clear message from this executive is that no part of Northern Ireland will be left behind. We will continue to be a champion for every part of Northern Ireland, north, south, east, west, and that is essential in terms of at the very heart of all of the work that we do.
McGrills.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister. Given its prominent place in the draft programme for government, can the Deputy First Minister provide an update on work to end violence against women and girls?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Look, absolutely, as the member will be aware, we've just recently launched our framework and the delivery plan, and we're currently actively working on the delivery of the funding schemes, both the Challenge Scheme and the Change Fund. So the Challenge Fund will be based around two key questions being put out to the sector and inviting invitations from organisations to come forward with proposals as to how to meet those challenges. We're aiming for that to go live in October, so this month. And in relation to the Change Fund, this is a fund that will be working with local councils and community-based organisations. That will have to be delivered through different mechanisms, but we are striving to get that out as early as possible, no later than January of 2025, but we are working, if at all possible, to get that out prior to that date.
Mr McReynolds.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister, and you've mentioned some funding schemes there. Can you elaborate about how much resource has been set aside to facilitate this?
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yes, there's £3 million that's available currently for those funds. Rolling forward over the course of the next 2 years, that's about £5 million altogether. But I can advise the member that we had bid for additional resources even beyond that. The £3 million is not the totality of our ambition for what we want to achieve through this strategy and the delivery plan. But it is a start. We took the decision that rather than simply wait for everything that we would have wanted, it is much better to start and to try to get that important work underway and support those organisations as well, doing such important work with the sector and working with women and girls who find themselves in this situation. So yes, that's the start. If we can get additional resources in the interim, of course all of these are scalable and we can scale up, and we will do so if we can get that. But in the meantime, that's the budget we're currently working with.
That concludes questions to the Executive Office. If members will take their ease while we move to the questions for the Minister for Communities.